On February 23, 1946, at Los Baños prison camp outside Manila, Japanese General Tomoyuki Yamashita made his way up the 13 stairs that led to the gallows to meet his maker. He had been sentenced for crimes committed by Japanese soldiers in the Philippines and in Singapore under his command. As he made his final statement, he thanked the American military for their kind treatment during a trial that many thought was hasty. Thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, lost their lives as he led the Japanese army on a rampage through the South Pacific during World War II. But was it all Yamashita's fault? Welcome back to Nutty History. In this episode, we're exploring the life of one of Japan's most deadly and misunderstood generals, Tomoyuki Yamashita. In December 1940, General Yamashita met with Hitler as part of a Japanese escort that had come to Germany to see what all the fuss was about before signing on as a member of the Tripartite Pact.
In Berlin, Hitler welcomed Japan to his gang. The three-power treaty, Germany, Italy, Japan. Dictator nations falling in step for world domination.
Yamashita wasn't impressed. He told his staff that he, Hitler, seemed more like a clerk than a leader. Still, Yamashita publicly praised the dictator, saying the Japanese and the Germans shared a spiritual connection, and soon the two nations were allies. A few years later, on February 6, 1944, General MacArthur declared that Manila had fallen. U.S. forces had the Japanese surrounded. General Yamashita and his troops had retreated into the mountains north of the city. Around 19,000 or so Japanese soldiers remained holed up in Intramuros, the historic old town at the center of Manila. They had created roadblocks and damaged bridges to try and stave off the Americans.
A new power in the Far East, the Philippine Army. It has a social as well as military significance. This is emphasized by General MacArthur of the USA, organizing the defense of the islands.
The Philippines Defense Act is, in effect, a charter of individual liberty and national freedom.
With American casualties mounting, General MacArthur gave the go-ahead to use heavy artillery, something he did not want to do at first.
Its purpose is to preserve the integrity of the only Christian state in the Far East, to perpetuate ideals of religious freedom, personal liberty, and republican government which have, under American tutelage, flowered here into fruition.
The result was the utter devastation of the city. Buildings were shelled mercilessly to get the Japanese to give up. Facing imminent defeat, the Japanese started taking out their anger on the non-combatants trapped in the crossfire. A reported order from Japanese command stated that even women and children have become guerrillas. All people on the battlefield, with the exception of Japanese military personnel, Japanese civilians, and special construction units, will be put to death. Over the next few weeks, over 100,000 non-combatants were taken out. Some estimates put that number as high as 500,000 during the month-long battle for Manila. There were reports of soldiers using the non-combatants as shields and all kinds of sick treatment by the Japanese army. By March 4th, the Americans had taken the city. But calling it a city by that point might be generous because it was a rubble heap. If every Japanese soldier had listened to General Yamashita's orders, then Manila would have simply been abandoned. The U.S. Army would have easily taken the city. However, one of Yamashita's subordinates, Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi, ignored Yamashita's orders and instead doubled down in the center of Manila. As the weeks went on and it became clear that the Japanese would lose, Iwabuchi took the easy way out. By the time Iwabuchi failed to follow orders, the Japanese military was already in disarray. In fact, Yamashita himself had arrived in the Pacific and was given command of the action there only a few months before the Battle of Manila. For the previous 2 years, he had been basically sent to twiddle his thumbs in Manchuria, presumably because he called Singaporeans citizens of Japan in a speech he gave after the Japanese took Singapore. The Battle of Singapore is considered one of the worst defeats in British military history. It was a triumph for General Yamashita, who guided the Japanese army down the Malaysian peninsula and into Singapore on February 8, 1942. His push through Malaya and into Singapore would earn him the nickname the Malayan Tiger. At the time, Singapore was a key strategic city held by the British, so important that Winston Churchill ordered his military commanders to fight till the last man.
These are among the last pictures taken before the fall of Singapore. We released them because they are a part of British Empire history, for good or ill. But it's hard to look at them without bitterness and unrest.
Churchill would later say that what ended up happening was the worst disaster in British military history, and what many historians see as the beginning of the end of British colonial rule. Despite being outnumbered, Yamashita and the Japanese were able to defeat the British by disrupting water supplies to the island. Thirsty and surrounded, the British quickly surrendered unconditionally. 80,000 British, Indian, and Australian soldiers became prisoners. But just like in Manila, the worst was yet to come. In the days and weeks following the British surrender of Singapore, the Japanese began a systematic purge of anyone thought to be Chinese or helping them on the island. The purge was planned before Japanese troops even landed in Singapore. The government had already drafted a document titled Implementation Guideline for Manipulating Overseas Chinese, and had their sights set on eliminating those they believed to be a threat in Singapore. Japanese forces went from door to door throughout Singapore and rounded up anyone they thought fit the bill. They set up screening centers in different neighborhoods to inspect any fighting-age men who could potentially be considered. In the end, somewhere around 50,000 people were ended for no reason. After the battle, dozens of graves were found throughout the island. While Yamashita didn't order the purge directly, the orders came down from senior officials who were serving under his command. It's highly unlikely that he didn't know what was going on. What's more, on his march down through the Malayan Peninsula to Singapore, some 150,000 Tamil Indians were reportedly ended, and most historians think that that number is a gross underestimation. After Yamashita was captured, a U.S. military trial was held in Manila to decide his fate. From October 29th to December 7th, 1945, the Japanese general sat in silence as over 200 witnesses testified to atrocities committed by the Japanese army in Malaya, the Philippines, and Singapore by soldiers under his command. His defense, led by an American lawyer named Harry Clark, did its best to paint Yamashita as a general commanding a vast army who was unaware of the horrible crimes being committed by those under him. In Clark's opening statement, he said that Yamashita was not charged with having done something or having failed to do something, but solely with having been something. American jurisprudence recognizes no such principle so far as its own military personnel are concerned. In what has become known as the Yamashita Standard, the judges determined that it didn't matter whether or not he knew about the atrocities committed. The simple fact that he was the general made him responsible for the actions of his subordinates. On December 7th, General Yamashita was sentenced to the rope. 2.5 months later, just hours before his walk up to the gallows, he dictated a statement to a Buddhist prison chaplain from his cell. In the statement, he showed genuine remorse. He didn't make any excuses, and he discussed the Japanese Army's conduct during the war. He ruminated that a lack of science and investment had led to the kamikaze mentality. We tried to fight and win the war by throwing away the priceless lives of our nation as substitutes for bullets and bombs. We made the greatest mistake, unprecedented in world history, by trying to make up for the lack of material and scientific knowledge with human bodies. He even went on for a few paragraphs about the importance of women's rights and access to education, an issue he seemed genuinely passionate about and something pretty rare for a military man during the 1940s to care about. The statement also included one of the most eloquent thoughts about the atomic bomb. At the time, a brand new apocalyptic tech that the human race was just starting to wrap its head around. If there is any method to defend against atomic bombs, the weapon that has made all past warfare obsolete, it would simply be to create nations all over the world that would never contemplate the use of such weapons. Wise words from a criminal. General Tomoyuki Yamashita was a complex character for sure. What do you think? Did Yamashita get what he deserved? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more nutty history.